Welcome to the Radically Genuine Podcast. I'm Dr. Roger McFillin. Flying solo today. Hope everyone bears with me. I think it's going to be an interesting topic. If you have been following me on Substack, drmcfillin.com, Radically Genuine, you probably noticed that I put out a mind control series. Up to right now, I think there's been 8 total that have been released. It's possible there'll be more by the time that this episode is out. And I want to tell you about how this started to percolate for me. I was taking a drive probably a few years ago. I was listening to the radio. I think it was a news program. And I noticed something. Every single story seemed to follow the same structure. Threat here. Who's responsible for that threat? Here's the group you should be angry at. Here's the group you should be afraid of. Story after story, different topic, same architecture, really fit my entire life with mainstream media. See the same thing on social media. And I remember pulling off the road somewhere. I think it was hitting me quite profoundly, as if I was like awakening to something that I should have woken up to much earlier, because I hadn't really been able to articulate it before. I had been consuming this material my entire life. I'd never asked who built the machine producing it, because that's conspiracy theory. That there's the idea that there's something maniacal behind it. But I was questioning, what is this designed to do? Why have we created this as a human society? Why it made me feel the same way that I'm sure makes other people feel. And I've spent a lot of my professional life really fascinated with how the human mind works. And I still miss this kind of aspect about it. And this is why I built this series. I think it was years in the making, of course, because I've really started kind of going down that rabbit hole a little bit. And I think this series on Substack really puts a lot of the science behind it and some of the history that I was unaware of. So this episode is kind of that whole thing laid out clearly as I know it at this point. I'm certain it's going to evolve, but by the end of this, I want you to understand how the system works, not in a vague conspiratorial way, in a specific, documented, here are the names and here is the research way. Because you cannot defend against something that you cannot see. So let's make sure we all see it. Most people think of mind control as something that happens to other people in other countries, other eras. Something dramatic, something visible. The reality is, I think, much quieter than that. And it starts before you probably even take your first breath. There's a field of research called epigenetics. And what it tells us is that your lived experience changes the way your genes express themselves. And some of those changes are hereditary. They pass to your children, potentially to their children. The research on this is not really fringe. For example, a study out of Mount Sinai found that children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors showed measurable hormonal differences in stress response compared to control groups, not because of anything that happened to them directly, but because what had happened to their grandparents. So think about what this potentially might mean, that the fear your great-grandmother carried, that powerlessness your grandfather felt in conditions he could not control, these conditions become biological fingerprints that still have an effect on your nervous system. Now, it's not doom and gloom. It doesn't mean that you're determined to experience that. It means that the same conditions have to be presented. Well, not even the same conditions. You just have to have those anxious parents, or those stories, or that threat idea that's constantly played, and then it activates it. It's why, you see worried parents have worried kids type thing. We say it's genetic determinism, but it's not. It's much more sophisticated and complicated than that. But often we don't look at what is in society, that a lot of these programs that are installed into our collective consciousness have been so normalized that we don't even think about it, that there could be something that is quite purposeful about it. Rules about who you are, what you deserve, how much you're allowed to trust, whether the world is safe or dangerous. Those rules were handed to you as some truth. Most of us spend our entire lives acting on this programming that we have never once examined. I think it's quite difficult for us to think that we have thoughts that are like installed into our consciousness, not anything directly that we have experienced. And I think the first act of mental sovereignty is your willingness to look at what you were handed and ask, is this actually true? Or is this just old programming? In 1961, a psychologist at Yale named Stanley Milgram ran one of the most disturbing experiments in the history of behavioral science. You might know the basics. You might have heard it in high school or college or introductory psychology classes. Ordinary people were recruited for what they believed was a learning study. An authority figure in a white coat instructed them to administer electric shocks to another person every time that person gave a wrong answer. The shocks escalated. The person receiving them screamed, begged them to stop, often went silent. Some people would say, I have a heart condition, you're going to kill me. What they found was that 65% of participants administered what they believed were a potentially lethal 450 volt shock, simply because a man in a white coat told them to continue. We've probably heard that before. Yes, 65% of people would murder a fellow human being, apparently, because they were told to do that by an authority figure. And so you step back and you say, well, how did we get there? And that was an interesting question for me to ponder. But what is less commonly taught is what Milgram found when he changed the conditions. When participants could see another person refuse the authority's instruction, compliance dropped from 65% to 10%. I'll say that again. When participants could see another person refuse the authority's instructions, compliance dropped from 65 to 10%. One visible act of refusal reduced obedience by over 80%. I used to sign off on X posts and Substacks by saying, resist. This is why I would say that. See, this is a finding, though, they don't teach, because this finding is dangerous to the people who need your compliance. The knowledge that one person publicly refusing changes the calculus for everyone watching becomes like knowledge that has to be carefully managed. Milgram was documenting not a flaw in human nature, but a very important feature. We are wired for social coordination. We defer to perceived expertise. These are not necessarily weaknesses. This is how communities function. It's how we have survived. Our ancestors have survived. But they become weapons when the people yielding authority are not trustworthy or just or dark. And the first step to addressing that is recognizing that you are inside a compliance structure. Okay? And we can break ourselves out of it. Edward Bernays is an important figure, probably one you were never taught about in school. He was Sigmund Freud's nephew. He took his uncle's ideas about the unconscious and turned them into a commercial enterprise. He invented the modern public relations industry, modern advertising. In 1928, he wrote a book called Propaganda, in which he argued openly and without apology that the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses was the essential element of a democratic society. He was not describing a threat. He was describing his profession. Bernays ran a campaign in the 1920s to get women to smoke. He hired women to light cigarettes at a public parade and called them torches of freedom, linking smoking to female liberation, and then sales increased substantially. He had taken a product and attached it to an identity. Sound familiar? You know, my concern with psychiatric drugs, of course. This is the basic mechanism of modern media. You're not being sold a product. You're being sold a self, a version of who you are that requires the product to maintain. A researcher named Herbert Krugman found that within 30 seconds of watching television, the brain shifts from active critical thinking to a passive, suggestible state, 30 seconds, that is the window between you engaging with content and the content engaging with you. I call this drift. So you're not even using your conscious mind to resist. Think about all the scrolling we're doing. It's just seeping into your subconscious, and you don't even know that these thoughts are not yours. They were implanted. Operation Mockingbird was a documented CIA program to recruit journalists and plant stories into American media. The Church Committee confirmed its existence in 1975. At its height, the program had assets at every major television network and most major newspapers. That program supposedly has ended. The infrastructure was not, and the consolidation of media ownership that followed from hundreds of independent outlets to roughly 6 corporations controlling the majority of what Americans consume did not reverse that influence. It's kind of deepened it. I mean, why do you think the pharmaceutical company wanted to advertise for major news networks? Is it to sell more drugs? I mean, that's part of it. I'm not denying that. But they control the news. So now there's not going to be a negative story about a pharmaceutical product because you fund them. So your thoughts are your most precious possession. The war for your mind is fought primarily on a terrain of what you believe you came up with yourself. That's why being unconscious as a society is pushed on you. Like, it's constant stimulation, folks. How many people can just sit in silence anymore? And most of the American public is now glued to their phones, watching Netflix, and still exposed to news that is curated for them. I think we're divided by design. And in 1994, a social psychologist named Musafer Sharif ran an experiment at a summer camp in Oklahoma. He took 2 groups of boys, kept them separate, let them form group identities, then introduced competition between them. Within days, they were raiding each other's cabins, burning each other's flags, refusing to eat in the same cafeteria. Boys who had been strangers 3 weeks earlier expressed genuine contempt for each other. Sheriff manufactured tribalism from nothing, using only separation and competition. Around the same time, Henry Tajfel ran what became known as the minimal group paradigm. He assigned people to groups based on nothing, literally coin flips, and found they immediately began favoring their in-group and discriminating against the out-group. Not because of real conflict, simply because of the label. You do not need a real difference to produce tribalism. You need a category and the suggestion that the other group threatens what you care about. Now look at the American political media for the past 30 years and more and tell me this is not a deliberate design. Every political news cycle follows the same architecture Sheriff used at that summer camp. Here is your group. Here is the other group. Here's what they are doing to you. The issues change. The structure never does. But do we really, in any way, examine what is happening in government? It's all to keep you divided and distracted while they all continue with pretty much the same agenda: the military-industrial complex, fear, division, devaluing of the currency. Small amount of people hold the majority of wealth while these politicians are controlled. During COVID, researchers at MIT and Cornell documented that the top predictor of vaccine hesitancy was not scientific illiteracy. It was media consumption patterns previously used to generate political division. People who had been primed to distrust one political group transferred that distrust to public health institutions associated with that group for good measure. Division produced in one context was weaponized in another. So that is the technology being applied. That's why you saw more people who identified as Democrat or liberal were more likely to receive a COVID vaccine. And it was actually created to be some right versus left issue. Somehow freedom, freedom to choose what you put in your own body, became politicized based on tribalism. Sheriff found that simply bringing divided groups together did not undo the division. What worked was a shared problem neither group could solve alone: common ground larger than the manufactured conflict. This is precisely what they are preventing us from finding. There's a lot of files on you at this point. In 2013, researchers at Duke published a study showing that behavioral data could predict personality traits more accurately than a person's close friends. So Facebook likes alone predicted extroversion better than a spouse, and that was back in 2013. Cambridge Analytica harvested the data of 87 million Facebook users without their knowledge, built psychological profiles, and delivered individually targeted political messaging designed to exploit each person's specific vulnerabilities. Not demographics, psychology. Every platform you use is conducting continuous behavioral testing on your responses. Your feed is not showing you the world, folks. It's showing you a curated version of the world designed to maximize your engagement. And engagement is most reliably produced by content that triggers anxiety, outrage, and tribal threat response. Trust me, this algorithm is not neutral and it's been optimized. And what it has been optimized to produce is a state of agitation that keeps you reactive and keeps you in a neurological condition where critical thinking is the last thing happening. If you think the mental health epidemic and the chronic disease epidemic is only about some physical condition that's genetic, you're wrong. We're in a state of nervous system dysregulation in dis-ease, and it's purposeful, it's intentional, and the masses are being brainwashed. Behavioral economists, they call this architecture like the nudge. The idea is that you can dramatically shape behavior by changing the default options people face without restricting their freedom in any visible way. So it's the illusion of freedom. Just make the desired behavior the path of least resistance. The digital environment you live in is a nudge architecture designed by people who understand your psychological profile better than you. This is the file they have on you. They're using it every day. You're very predictable, folks. Trust me, very predictable. So much so, they can predict almost every decision that you're going to make, who you're going to vote for, what food you're going to buy, what you're going to consume. And it's all forced your way to create your version of reality. And these things have been going on since you were children. So before any of these programs could work on you, they required a foundation, like a mind already primed for fear, already trained to defer to authority, already separated from your own sense of power. So it's fear provocation. And he built this into even childhood books. William Golding published Lord of the Flies in 1954, mandated in all American schools. These boys stranded on an island descended into savagery and murder. You ever wonder why, of all works of literature, that this is going to be one that is mandated? Golden described it as proof that humans are inherently violent and that the civilization is the only thing holding back our brutality. And here's what almost nobody knows. While Golding was writing that book, this actually really happened in real life. 6 real boys were stranded on a real island in the Pacific. 1965, 6 Tongan teenagers shipwrecked on a volcanic island called Ata after a storm. They were there for 15 months. And when they were found, they had built a garden, divided tasks by skill, created a process for resolving conflict. One boy had broken his leg. They set it and cared for him for 15 months. He walked off the island. The story that children without adults become savages is not true. The story was installed in a particular way for a particular reason. And it's not just Golding. How about Bambi? Why are all these children's books include like a mother being killed or being separated from a parent? Bambi's mother shot in the first 20 minutes. The Lion King, Simba watches his father die, as do all these kids. Dumbo is separated from his mother and humiliated. Pinocchio faces abduction and near death. Story after story in which the world is dangerous, adults fail, and the child is alone. I'm not saying there's no value in stories about difficulty, but I'm saying there's a pattern here, a consistent pattern of early fear installation through narrative, and fear conditioned children become exactly what every institution of control needs. Adults already certain that the world is dangerous and they're not equipped to navigate it without permission from someone above them. This certainly was manufactured. It's manufactured before you were old enough to question it. And they tend to medicalize the whole operation. Now, I want to show you where it all converges. There is a 7-page document in the CIA's official reading room, written in the early 1950s. The title is Special Research for Artichoke. The CIA researchers who wrote it wanted to develop chemicals capable of producing what they call an agitating effect, anxiety, nervousness, tension, or a depressing effect, creating feelings of despondency, hopelessness, and lethargy in targeted individuals. Yes, a covert operation, a bioweapon. They talked about slipping this into food, water, alcohol, cigarettes. They talked about it being disguised as medicine, disguised as vaccination. You think I'm making this up? Do your research. It's available. Go to my Substack. I published on this. Now, call me a conspiracy theorist, but when I see patterns, I recognize them. In 2023, the United States filled over 80 million prescriptions for antidepressants. Drugs whose primary mechanism involves altering the same neurochemical systems that the document was studying 70 years ago. There's a documented institutional line connecting the CIA's behavioral research program to the structure of modern psychiatric care. And it runs through one man most Americans have probably never heard of, Dr. D. Ewan Cameron. He was president of the American Psychiatric Association in 1952. Founding president of the World Psychiatric Association, chair of psychiatry at McGill University, one of the most credentialed psychiatrists in North America. He was also running MK Ultra subproject 68. Under CIA funding, laundered through a front organization, Cameron conducted experiments at McGill's Allen Memorial Institute. He kept patients in chemically induced sleep for weeks or months. He administered ECT at rates 30 to 40 times the accepted clinical norm. Then he looped recorded audio through speakers in their pillow helmets for up to 16 hours a day to reprogram them. He called this depatterning. His patients lost the ability to remember who they were, where they lived, who their children were. Many never recovered. They came in with anxiety, with low mood, with grief, with the ordinary weight of difficult lives. And Cameron was not prosecuted, not expelled. He continued publishing. He mentored the next generation of psychiatrists. His methods, stripped of the CIA framing, are recognizable ancestors of treatments still in clinical use. The CIA did not just use psychiatry as a cover, it helped shape what American psychiatry became. In 1973, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered the MK Ultra files destroyed before congressional investigators arrived. The Church Committee worked with what remained. They could not find the full scope of what had been done because it had been burned. The files burned. The knowledge didn't, though. The researchers continued their careers. The studies were published without disclosing their CIA origins. The compounds screened for behavioral effects generated a scientific literature that became the foundation of modern psychopharmacology. Now the numbers. Antidepressant prescribing has increased over 3,000% since Prozac was introduced in the late 1980s. The rate of disability due to mental illness has increased in near perfect parallel. More diagnosed, more medicated, more disabled every single decade. Coincidence? In 2022, a landmark review published in Molecular Psychiatry concluded there is no evidence that depression is caused by lower serotonin levels. The serotonin hypothesis. I've covered this quite extensively. The scientific claim that sold 40 years of antidepressants prescribing to hundreds of millions of people was false. It was fake. This study is well known. It's been downloaded millions of times. But guess what? Prescribing rates have not changed. Why? Does this have anything to do with behavioral control mechanisms, social control mechanisms, and how we're influenced? I testified before, well, I didn't testify. I presented before an FDA advisory committee about SSRIs and pregnancy. I reviewed documents in the official regulatory record showing evidence of permanent developmental harms to infants exposed in utero. That evidence did not change prescribing guidelines. It did not produce a single mainstream news story that I'm aware of. Like, they just avoid this stuff. I practice in this system, folks. And, I've reached the point a long time ago that I could no longer avoid any of the evidence that it was clear that the system is doing mass harm. Now, talk about children. In 1980, ADHD did not exist as a diagnostic category, but by 2019, nearly 10 million American children had the diagnosis. 6 million are taking a form of meth. Some as 4 years old, and what I'll reveal later, some younger than 1. Not a joke. And look at what behaviors are being drugged. Difficulty sitting still, distractibility, impulsivity, restlessness. Opposition? Whose problem are those behaviors? Those aren't a child's problem. That's an institutional problem. They're what happens when you require children to sit for 6 hours a day, suppress every biological impulse toward movement and self-direction, put them under artificial lighting, feed them poison. ADHD rates are highest in states with the most rigid academic accountability systems. Boys are diagnosed at 3 times the rate of girls. Boys have defective brains, or because their behaviors that define the disorder in the DSM map almost perfectly into the behaviors that disrupt classrooms organized around compliance. We are not treating a disease. We are drugging inconvenience. Active boys. We're teaching children at 7, 8, 9 years old that the problem lives within their brain and the solution comes in a capsule that you have to take before school. Sit down. Follow the rules. Be a good little citizen. I'm not telling you your doctor is a CIA operative. That's hyperbolic. And I'm not asking you to believe in a room full of people planning this in real time. What I'm telling you is that the methods developed in America's most documented mind control programs were not dismantled in 1975. They've become more privatized, institutionalized, embedded in diagnostic manuals written by committees with pharmaceutical funding, reimbursed by a system that pays for a prescription in 15 minutes and barely pays for a real conversation. Transmitted to hundreds of millions of people as settled science. They're lies. This is the final layer of what this series has been documenting. That you were programmed. You have these ancestral scripts. And those ancestral scripts for survival get activated. And it suspends critical thinking. And you're conditioned out of fear that you must rely on the tribal authority. So you become conditioned to obey. Your thoughts are constantly being colonized through media. From everything you watch coming out of Hollywood to what you consume on social media to children's books. You are divided from the people you might organize with. Your psychological profile was mapped and weaponized. Your children were fear conditioned before you could protect them. And when all of that produced the anxiety and the depression and disconnection that is inevitably produces a human being, then you're told that the problem was your brain chemistry, and they give you a pill. I'm not going to leave you there because hopelessness is what the system needs from you. A person who believes nothing can change is a person who will not try. That belief is itself a product of the conditioning. Go back to Milgram. 65% compliance when the authority stood alone. 10% when one person visibly refused. One person. That's the margin. One person willing to say what others are quietly thinking changes the entire calculus for everyone watching. That is why the professional destruction of people who speak against institutional consensus is not incidental to these systems. It's essential. They cannot afford you to see someone refuse and survive. And here's what I've learned. Anxiety does not live in brain chemistry. It lives in isolation and powerlessness, fear, in the gap between who you are and how you're being asked to live. What we call depression is a signal that something in your relationships, your work, your community, your sense of meaning is genuinely wrong and needs to change. They want you to ignore that signal, mute that signal, drug that signal. The system profits from you not knowing that. It profits from you believing the problem is internal, individual, and treatable only by someone with a prescription pad. Because the moment you understand that your suffering is a rational response to real conditions, you become interested in changing those conditions. And that's the one outcome the system cannot accommodate. The most radical thing you can do is refuse that framing. If 1965 6-Tongan teenagers stole a boat and sailed off, and what they imagined would be an adventure, a storm caught them. For 8 days, they were battered. Their boat was destroyed. They landed on a volcanic island, 160 miles from where they started. No radio, no rescue plan, no adults, 15 months. When a captain named Peter Warner found them in 1966, he was prepared for what Golding had described, a breakdown, savagery, the collapse of everything decent without civilization to hold it together. But he found a functioning community. Tasks divided by skill, a garden, shelters, structured process for resolving conflict. When Rutger Bregman tracked down these boys now in their 70s and asked how they had done it, one of them said something I thought about since the moment I read it. He said, whenever someone felt hopeless, we sang. Not because singing solved the practical problem, because it reminded them who they were to each other. Because you cannot maintain the illusion of being alone when you're singing with other people. Because the despair, which was real and visited all of them, was never allowed to become the final word. Those boys had everything the system tells you will destroy you. No authority, no institutions, no diagnostic category for whatever they're feeling. Just each other and a decision to keep building something rather than let the fear be the last thing standing. And that's the answer. Not a technique or a supplement or a system. The answer is what those boys knew without being taught. You need other people, real ones. People you are building something with. People you are responsible to and who are responsible to you. A life organized around genuine relationships and genuine purpose is the most powerful counter-programming that exists. It's also the thing the system is most committed to preventing, because you cannot divide people who are actually in need of each other. This is the work. Understanding how the programming operates is only the beginning. Dismantling it requires that you build something real in its place. The other thing I want to let you know is that you've become addicted to this programming. The emotion that it creates, it feels like adrenaline. It's exciting even, and we get addicted to our own fear. But we are born into this illusion of separation. And look what we've handed over, our sovereignty, our freedoms. To such an extent, it's been a slippery slope. And you have to recognize what fear has done. It is a root cause of disease, folks. And it fuels an entire sick care system, a pharmaceutical system. I mean, are you really living if you're just afraid to die or you want to prolong your life? I know it's a bit disorienting to think that our thoughts are not our own, that our political affiliation has been really shaped to us through a curated algorithm, through our parents. I mean, we have become so disconnected from our government, which was not the intention of the Constitution, that we really don't have any idea what they're doing. We assume that there's two separate parties. But in my experience, that's nothing but theater. And so we become addicted to the theater. We just consume. Well, I think the time in human development is shifting out of this darkness. If we know anything from the Epstein files, is that you see the interconnected web of influence among the most powerful. and the darkness that we are shining the light on. And so, what I'm interested in is not only exposing that darkness, but more in creating the light. I speak often about the mental health industrial complex, but it's really a greater complex that influences all aspects of the rich and powerful and has a trickle down effect into managing the behavior of the masses. I hope you can take a look at some of the work that I am doing at Substack. I'm proud of it. It's a rising publication, often in the top 5 or 10 every week. I think it's number 33 currently as a bestseller in health politics. And there's a reason for that, because I'm willing to speak about this with the honesty it deserves. I mean, I pulled myself out of the medical system quite long ago. And so we're going to have to create something different, because what is happening out there, it is destroying the emotional and physical well-being of Western societies. And there's so much about ancient wisdom, traditions, knowledge that has been suppressed. I think it's spiritual. It's clearly spiritual. And it's a prevention of human evolution in consciousness, unity consciousness. Many of these so-called symptoms that get labeled and drugged in the allopathic Western medical system often can be just expansion and spiritual awakenings. I mean, we see this all the time now, where a shift in our understanding of unity consciousness and the interconnectedness of all people, a greater tendency towards love and moving past fear, is being labeled as delusions or psychosis, mania, or some other nonsensical label, ADHD. The more you get drugged, the more sedated and compliant you become. They have plenty of CIA funded research dating back 60 years, 70 years. You're much more easily influenced. So, what's the solution? Remove the interference. Stop watching television. You think you need television to be entertained? Read. If you haven't broken free from the news cycle, please do that. And your phone is an addictive propaganda device. You're being pushed to toxic food, alcohol, media, sports, to distract you from what really matters. Testosterone levels have dropped. So have fertility rates. What do we need to do to wake up? What do we need to do to be able to recognize we've been purposely divided, controlled, coerced, and we feel horrible? We don't trust our neighbors because that's been purposely conditioned to all of us since a young age. It's sad because I see toddlers on screens and devices. I saw that decades ago with iPads. And now, of course, kids can't really focus in school, and so they become dependent on video games and other things that are stimulating the brain. And we've pathologized it and medicalized it and drugged these people. It's interesting what's going to happen in the society, because we are undergoing this shift and we're seeing AI and its influence, which is going to take over a lot of industries. We're going to enter into a chaotic time. As the light is shining on the dark, we have to talk about what can be recreated, rebuilt, better. And I'm interested in following the topics on this, contributing to it myself, especially in health and mental well-being, but also following other leaders, those who are innovators, who are connected spiritually, want the best for humanity. I think there's going to be teams of people around the world that are going to gather up as these former institutions are going to fall. But I think the first step, and I hope this brief introduction into brainwashing helps people understand how easily you can be conditioned. For the real deep dive into all these subjects, again, go to Radically Genuine, Dr. McFillin, substack.com. You'll see it there. And please join and follow along. I think we're going to be building communities that shift certainly specific industries. And I have my areas of expertise that I want to lead on, and want others who have been harmed by the system or currently being educated and who are learning, who want to be helpers because they care. They care about being part of the solution and not the problem, who want to break free from the limitations of our current mental health care system and healthcare system, being part of the solution. This is the groups of us that have to get together. I haven't talked about the Conscious Clinician Collective in a while. That's because I'm about to institute some changes, and it's to build that community, and it's going to be for the better. So join now while you can. The Conscious Clinician Collective, CCC .org. I believe that's right. TheCCC.org. I'm sorry, thecccollective.org. That's a Conscious Clinician Collective. That's just one step in developing a community on a search engine. There's so much more we can do. But I certainly ask people to take a look at that. So thank you for being here for this overview of the series. I think this is what Radically Genuine is for. And I look forward to having more in-depth conversations around topics like this in the future. Thank you.